have to look so dumb. I have to look so dumb. I got my wipers going. So in the light of a shortened semester due to COVID season and the fact that I just got a new job, I actually filmed the last episode and this episode. I filmed this episode with the last one together, and thinking that it would be one episode, but I just talked too much about mood disorders and anxiety disorders. So enjoy the video and enjoy some Steven Tyler. Just like how we talked about with distinguishing between mood and emotion, in order to understand anxiety disorders, you first need to understand what the difference between a fear and anxiety is. So fear is kind of like an emotion. It's a reaction to something, and it's instantaneous and brief. It has to do with wanting to escape the situation and escape the fear. Anxiety, on the other hand, is focused on the future rather than the moment. It's negative thoughts that kind of build up inside your head. It has to do with avoiding the fearful situation rather than escaping it. So there are three types of anxiety. The first being anticipatory anxiety, which is basically just like a more generalized fear of what's going to happen. Situational anxiety is fear of a specific situation in the future that may or may not happen. And the third is panic, which we will get to in a little bit. All three to do with irrational fears that the person really has no credibility or evidence to support, and it interferes with how they interact with the world and their thinking in general. Well, first, I'm going to talk a little bit about like the biology and neuroscience of anxiety. Well, anxiety has a lot to do with this little structure in our brain called our amygdala, which is basically like our stress response center. So for those with anxiety disorders, their amygdala is overreactive and hypersensitive, and it kicks in a stress response that takes over your whole body when it's not really needed. The amygdala is responsible for the release of hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, which are only really needed in fight or flight situations and can break down the brain over extended periods of time. Chronic anxiety can actually change the way the brain physically looks. The first anxiety disorder I wanted to spend a little time talking about was panic disorder, and this is basically characterized by two parts. The first being that the person has to have experienced a panic attack before, which is basically characterized by 4 or more symptoms related to a heart attack, such as like an increased heartbeat or breathing, or just basically like the feeling that you're going to die. In addition to that, there has to be a panic or fear about having another panic disorder. So I definitely messed up right there. I meant to say panic attack. Worry centered around a panic attack. Individuals with panic disorder fall into what we call the panic circle. So it basically starts with like a neutral stimulus where it gets interpreted poorly, and that kicks in like the amygdala releasing those hormones and our fight or flight response. So from there, the person kind of overreacts to that and has the feeling of a panic attack is going on, and then they're gonna die and all this bad stuff, and that induces a panic attack, and then it happens again.
The next day, and the next day, and the...
So next we have obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. And this is characterized by thoughts and obsessions that lead to compulsive behavior that is needed to reduce the anxiety. There's 2 ways that you can be experiencing OCD, and the first is the negative reinforcement trap. And the negative reinforcement trap is when the compulsive behaviors actually work and take the anxiety away.
It feels great.
The person is left feeling better off because of their behavior, which is kind of like the reinforcement part, and the feeling of anxiety being taken away is the negative part. So the other way is what psychologists call suppression syndrome, and this is basically when the individual tries to just ignore the obsessive thought.
I said I'm ignoring you.
And actually, doing nothing else but trying to ignore the obsessions leads to the obsessions becoming even worse and more anxiety inducing. So next we have social anxiety disorder, or social phobia. This is characterized by an extreme and intense fear of any social interaction at all. Basically the feeling of like a performance sort of anxiety at all times. Like all anxiety disorders, the symptoms get in the way of the person being able to function. Their symptoms are present at nearly all times of their day. I know I'm going fast here and kind of moving through the anxiety disorders rather quickly, but this is a very condensed version of some things that you should know about psychology. But next we have separation anxiety disorder, and this is a disorder that is found mainly in children who have a fear of losing their parents. It's characterized by excessive and age-inappropriate thoughts of not wanting to be away from home or away from their parents.
The off-the-hip technique to detach a clingy child from his mother.
Children with separation anxiety are basically engulfed with this idea that something bad is going to happen to their parents and they won't be there after whatever activity or event is keeping them from their parents at that moment. And separation anxiety does tend to usually fade away as you grow out of it, but the longer it persists and the more we see it in older kids, the more their fears get more vivid. Children with separation anxiety almost always experience problems at night. They either have like chronic nightmares about losing their family, or experience bedwetting, or sleepwalking. So finally, I'm going to end with the last anxiety disorder, which is the most common reason why people come into therapy to get help is for a specific phobia. It's an irrational fear of something specific, but it gets in the way of something that they're trying to do. Most common types of specific phobias have to do with blood or injection, or an animal fear, or fears about like the environment and Mother Nature and storms and that such. But again, these are people who know that their fear is irrational and unproportional to like an actual threat of any sort, and it's affecting their daily lives to a point that they need help. We're talking about treatment and management for a little bit. With any mental illness, the best course of treatment is always going to be a combination of medication and therapy. Mood disorders and depression in general have long been thought to be basically like this one prong, one solution kind of deal, where one neurotransmitter has always thought to be lower or diminished in people with depression, and that was serotonin. So what psychologists and doctors thought we should do is give people medication that would work on that neurotransmitter serotonin. Medications called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors have been prescribed for people with mood disorders, and this is basically just a medication that works on that one neurotransmitter to get it engaged and active longer in the brain. Recently, studies have been starting to be done that kind of lead to the idea that mood disorders are affected by more than just serotonin. Other neurotransmitters like norepinephrine and dopamine have begun to be studied in people with mood disorders, leading to the prescription of things like selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors and selective dopamine reuptake inhibitors. And there's still a lot of research and work that needs to be done, but for the moment, the most common prescribed medication for mood disorders are SSRIs and things that mainly affect serotonin. Medication and treatment for anxiety disorders is a little bit more complex. The therapy side of things requires some kind of exposure to whatever is feared. So there's generally two ways that therapists and psychologists go about this, and that is either graded exposure, which is little by little exposing someone to the feared thing. Like if you're afraid of spiders, first you're going to look at a picture of a spider, and then you're going to be in the same room as a spider before you finally touch the spider, and then you're the spider. That is one way. And then the other type of exposure would be just flooding, where you're exposed to the stimulus all at once. So if someone is afraid of roller coasters, we put them on the top rope dragster. So some possible medications for anxiety disorders are, again, a little bit trickier than the SSRIs of mood disorders. How do you pronounce benzodiazepines? It's not how you say it. Benzodiazepines. The most commonly prescribed medication for anxiety disorders are benzodiazepines. What did she say, dude? We're just kind of call them benzos for short. So what they do is they basically work on this thing called the GABA receptor in the brain. Because anxiety disorders have to do with like an overwhelming and inappropriate fear and need of avoidance, what benzos do is kind of relax and cool you off. You have to be very careful when being prescribed or taking benzos. They are addictive, and you do get an increased tolerance as you take them. Most common benzos are like Xanax or Valium, but that's not to say that the medication is bad in any sense. And for a lot of people, it does work. And like I said, the best course of treatment is always going to be a combination of both therapy and that some kind of exposure to the feared stimulus, as well as medication to kind of cool you down and work inside the brain.
Touch-ups. So far in the series, we have covered what is stigma in the first episode and where it comes from. Then we covered personality disorders in the second episode, mood disorders in the third, and you just finished the video on anxiety disorders. One video left, and my last video is going to be what you can do to help break the stigma of mental illness in society. As always, I really appreciate you watching. I really hope that you're learning something from it, and I commend you for taking the time to go out of your way to try and become more educated on the topic of mental illness and help me break the stigma. So until next time, take care, much love, and I'll see you guys.